Welcome to the presentation on workforce readiness, increasing sovereign capability through a skilled workforce from industry-owned, industry-led workforce skills developers, IBSA Group. And thanks a lot to the NCVER for this opportunity to speak today. Today's session is based around a 6-month consultation series on developing modern manufacturing through a skilled workforce that provides recommendations to ensure Australia's manufacturing industry is equipped with the right skills to drive the country forward. The report speaks to the conference's key theme of learning from the past 12 months and helps answer the question of the role VET plays in our economic recovery. It was welcomed by Minister Robert for its extensive collaboration with industry, unions and the training sector, as well as government, to help inform the skills agenda. The importance of sovereign capability and how we will have a skills-led economic recovery was cited extensively, and a little bit more of that shortly. I'm Nick Hill. I'm the Marketing and Stakeholder Relationship Management Manager at IBSA, and I'll shortly be introducing our two main presenters, Sharon Robertson, the CEO of IBSA Group, and Phil Clarke, General Manager of Industry Engagement. The presentation will take the form of a discussion between Sharon and Phil, and we'll be responding to comments during the chat. Anyone wishing to download the report can visit manufacturingskillsreport.ibsa.org.au. There are 6 key recommendations in the report. Each one of them has a skills response recommendation drawn from it that have all come from the extensive discussions and events that were held by IBSA. Sharon, can I start by asking you to tell us a little bit more about the report and your insights into what you heard from the consultations?
Thanks, Nick, and welcome all. Great to be part of this, albeit virtually. Certainly, as you would have seen just then, there was 6 different areas which we'll be going through in a little bit more detail this morning. But for me, the key insights that certainly stood out from the time that we spent putting this work together was, I suppose, firstly and foremostly, the manufacturing sector is really well positioned and committed to supporting that sovereign capability that needs to be built here in Australia, and that's across all of the modern manufacturing skills priority areas. Building sovereign capability in manufacturing requires substantial skills development, and that's needed to address not only the shortage of skilled workers, but the quality and relevance of the training provided. The success of modern manufacturing strategy will be dependent on efficient production based on the implementation of new technologies, a highly skilled workforce and effective use of materials. Finally, the key takeout for me was that industry partnership and collaboration will be essential to take advantage of these opportunities. Before we get started, I thought it was useful if I could perhaps turn to Phil. He's actually been part of this process all the way through, and look, there's a lot of data there. Could you give us a little bit of background about how the outcomes on the Scaling Up report were developed?
Thanks, Sharon. Yes, certainly. Essentially, we ran 6 sectoral webinars aligned with the industry reference committees that IBSA supports. That was preceded by an webinar involving Minister Cash, which had some 150 participants, and then the Leaders Roundtable involving people from the 4 major national associations, in which there are about 50 people participated in that exercise as well. In terms of the 6 industry webinars, there were 460 employers and other industry representatives, 35 people from industry presented in those webinars and set the discussions up. Each webinar had an online poll, and there was a post-webinar survey as well. Subsequent to each of the webinars, we also did 19 in-depth interviews with people from industry from the different sectors that we support. In addition to that, we also undertook analysis of our existing training package coverage, which showed that about 75% of our qualifications that IBSA maintains have some connection to the sort of work that would be done in the 6 industry sectors in the modern manufacturing strategy. in that context, we work very closely with the team from the Department of Industry and shared a lot of information with them in terms of the work they were doing on the sectoral roadmaps and the data that we were picking up from our webinars. So it was a fairly comprehensive gathering of information around this critical issue, Sharon.
Thanks, Phil. And certainly that sets the scene for some of the conversations about the findings now. As some of you may be aware, the report calls for the development of a workforce development strategy for manufacturing. As some of you are aware, this has not been a feature of the vet sector for a number of years now. Philip, can I just ask, what did we find that justified such a proposed intervention?
Well, I think there are two critical events have come together. The rollout of Industry 4.0 and the technologies associated was already well underway in Australia, and I think that had already set up some challenges around the sorts of skills that the workforce were going to need. But when that was combined with the COVID-19 pandemic, local manufacturing became particularly critical as key supply chains were broken in the initial days of the pandemic, and there was a need to respond to those critical events. That in itself established a whole reinvigoration of the debate about sovereign capability in Australia. Interestingly, though, also our surveys rather revealed that the firms that involved in the webinar series were quite positive, and 67% of them had actually seen some opportunity emerge out of the sort of industry support that was going into the modern manufacturing statement. There's sort of two forces at play here. The report talks about the long-term skill shortages or skill supply problem emerging through the decline in apprenticeships and numbers and trainings associated with the trades. In addition to that, there's been a reluctance to develop apprenticeships that at the higher levels of diploma and advanced diploma, which are the very skill levels that are required in advanced manufacturing. And would refer here, this of course has been an issue, it's been around for some time. The NCVER has published work in April 2019, higher apprenticeships in Australia, what are we talking about? In addition to the entry-level challenges that we've got, the implementation of advanced technology and associated change work practices means that the existing workforce will also need significant retraining and skill upgrades to maximise opportunities the new technologies bring. This includes digital and soft skills as well as the traditional trade skills. There was a recognition across the webinars that migration is not a short-term solution to this at all, and probably isn't going beyond the short term either. So there's a real public policy challenge here. Typically, public funding for vet is focused on new entrants to the labour market or re-entrants. Apprenticeship places have received the highest priority, and there have been a lot of initiatives to stimulate numbers. However, with some exceptions, existing worker training has largely been seen as the responsibility of employers and individuals. That arrangement is broadly aligned with perceptions of public and private benefit flowing from the investment in skills. The question, I think, at this time is, in this unique set of circumstances, is whether there are significant public returns from government investment in existing workforce training, primarily to ensure the opportunities we have are not lost. So that workforce development, that workforce strategy, Sharon, becomes quite a critical sort of policy issue that I think governments will have to address over the next year or two.
Thanks, Phil. And that's quite evident when you look at actually, I suppose, all the different forces and I suppose points that you've just raised then. You can see that it's not one factor that's going to drive our workforce development going forward. There's a multitude of points there. So thanks, Phil. Another point that came out really strongly throughout the report was the need for greater collaboration. In terms of tertiary education, there's been a number of attempts to break down the barriers between higher education and VET, and that's been the case for some time now. What did the series tell us that makes this such a critical issue for us to actually consider?
A consistent message that came through the webinars and the interviews that we undertook as well with industry participants revealed the importance of greater collaboration between firms, education providers and governments to ensure that opportunities were maximised. Reference was made through the series to the value of precincts and hubs. There's particular reference made to developments around the new Western Sydney airport. But there are other examples across the country which are bringing together firms and businesses. The reality is that this won't be a pure market response, that there actually is a need for intervention, and collaboration is central to that. Throughout the series, there were also references made to good examples of collaboration between TAFE and universities, but there were others, unfortunately, where the necessary levels of collaboration were perhaps have been hard to achieve. And again, the NCVER has written on this in a report in 2017, the boundaries and connections between VET and higher education, confused, contested and collaborative. Certainly, there's no doubt that those two systems work under different regulatory and funding regimes and ownership. But this is an area where some real priority has to be given, I think, to improve performance.
Thanks, Phil. And certainly the other thing we all heard was that need for collaboration between industry and the training sector. So that's both the education and training more broadly. That was certainly another key thing that was put forward by industry as a key enabler. Moving back to, I suppose, that skills response, the report highlights the need for the development of a system for or to support micro-credentials. VET already has a unit system of qualifications with the capacity to develop skill sets within these qualifications. We know there's a lot of unit level enrolment. So what's the problem that led to this being such a critical issue in the series?
And it certainly is a very topical issue at the moment, and that's reflected in a recent NCVER podcast. The point was made particularly strongly by Jennifer Westacott in the Leaders Forum, and where I believe she was stressing the importance of being able to systematically understand the skills and knowledge that was held was most critical. And at the moment, that's not easy to do below the qualification level in VET, unless where there's a direct link to an alternative form of credential, such as a license or a ticket. So it's a difficult issue, but certainly I think for the existing workforce, it's a key part of encouraging labour market flexibility.
Thanks. Good point. Later in this, I suppose, discussion today, we'll talk about the importance industry participants place on apprenticeships. There's an interesting tension between those calling for greater flexibility in apprenticeships while others are advocating for in-depth, time-consuming entry-level arrangements. Can you just talk us through that a little bit, Phil?
Well, I'd have to stress that I don't think anyone in the webinar series was calling for a breakup of entry-level arrangements. Indeed, apprenticeships were strongly supported. Apprenticeships were referred to as the bedrock of skill development for manufacturing. It might be a moot point, but I think the call for micro-credentials was more a call for a reliable credential system for skills and knowledge people gain throughout their working life in formal and in work-based settings. Getting these arrangements right allow for a more reliable signals in the labour market and greater flexibility and recognition and the reward arrangements.
And getting, I suppose, the settings right is certainly something that has been an issue and a priority for some times now. We hear a lot about change and how we need to go through major change in our skills development arrangements, evidenced by the skills reform work that's currently underway. From your experience throughout this series, why will it be so different this time?
Well, we've already talked about the importance participants gave to the development of a systemic approach to micro-credentials, but I think participants in the series were also reflecting a strong need for other change and improvement. Qualifications reflect technologies and work practices that align to their utilisation. As NCVER research shows, many training package qualifications do include competencies related to digitisation, but not necessarily to the skill level increasingly required in the workplace. The other area I think that is changing quite fundamentally, and this has come through our own work over time, but particularly came through in the webinar series, was the importance of building sustainability into all qualifications. Throughout the series, people from industry spoke of the need to reduce waste and operate at high levels of efficiency to be competitive. There is a strong link between this and the desire to achieve greater sovereign capability. The other area I would refer to as being a quite fundamental change out of all of this is the apprenticeships at higher AQF levels, and also across new and emerging sectors such as space and advanced minerals processing. They will be key changes that we will have to make over the next few years.
And I suppose it's both an opportunity to take on lessons learned from the last year, particularly COVID's taught us many things, and one of those things is the importance of sovereign capability and the importance and reliance on our skills system to actually provide that workforce that we need going forward. We're certainly seeing evidence of skills shortages across the economy here in Australia, especially in sectors heavily dependent on migration. What did the series tell us about skills shortages in manufacturing, and what might some of the solutions be?
Well, first, just to give a sense of the scale, in our surveys, skills shortages came up as comfortably the biggest workforce challenge faced by each of those manufacturing sectors. 26% of employers responding to the survey listed that as number one, compared to keeping up with technology, number two, and attracting the right staff with 10% as number three. And in fact, that may be included in the definition of skill shortages. I think maintaining the importance of apprenticeships as the bedrock of entry-level training came through in every group of the series. The need to maintain the existing areas of coverage, but also to expand them into the higher level qualifications was absolutely critical. There was also a lot of discussion about careers advice, and with it the perception of careers advice's impact on recruitment into manufacturing. I'll just make the comment that the establishment of the National Careers Institute has seen the establishment of a single quality source of information on occupations. But this has to be well communicated to parents and to young people. It was noted during the series that David Gonski and Peter Shergold had recommended to the New South Wales government that a career advisory service be established within that state. And it was the first recommendation from their report that was accepted. So this is a really critical area of changing the image of the sector and more effectively communicating that to people entering the workforce.
True. Absolutely right. And let's hope it actually does make the difference. This is an excellent opportunity to do so. There's certainly a number of findings from the series, and the reports attracted quite a lot of attention. If Australia's to have that sovereign capability that we've talked to today, what, in your views, Phil, are the steps that must be taken now?
The crucial point to make is in the webinar series and in the reaction to the report, the development of a skilled workforce is central to the opportunities manufacturing is currently presented with. And this will require a workforce development strategy, which will have sort of, I would argue, the following key features. First of all, apprenticeships will be at its core. There will be a need for a significant upskilling of the existing workforce. The focus will shift increasingly to higher level qualifications, both at the entry level and for the workforce as a whole. The qualifications will need to be upgraded to better cover Industry 4.0 technologies, especially associated with digitisation and automation, and a system of micro-credentials that better enable the recognition of skills and knowledge of the entire workforce will need to be established.
Thanks, Phil. And look, I think that's a really good summary for actually probably the key things that came out of the report, in addition to the development of a workforce strategy to support the manufacturing sector going forward. Look, that's all we've probably got time for, so I might just hand back over to Nick. Thanks, Nick, just to wrap up for this morning.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sharon and Phil. I think we covered a fair bit, and the report itself has got a lot more depth of insight to it. So we see this as the start of a number of discussions, further research initiatives. So if anyone listening to this is interested in finding out a little bit more about the data that sits behind the report, or discuss ways of carrying forward those discussions where we might be able to help work with you with that, then please get in touch and let us know. We'll also be staying on the chat function for a few more minutes if you've got any further comments or questions. And lastly, have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference.